Am I all set to just get started?
You definitely can. I was going to
Perfect.
try and give folks some time to get in
Okay.
here, but
Sounds good.
if
No,
you
that
want
sounds good.
to, okay,
Yeah, I'm good.
let's give folks just a little bit of time. Yeah, 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 yeah. Give folks one more minute and then we're going to
Hmm.
start.
Sounds cool.
Alrighty, everyone, welcome to the last week of the Bring It Home series with West to West Movement. We are so honored to be able to host one of the highly esteemed organizers from the All African People's Revolutionary Party, a long-term West to West supporter and former Saturday school teacher, Brother Ajamu Umi, as we discuss reclaiming African messaging, media, and this title, The Cultural, the Critical Weapon for Liberation. We're going to get straight into it. Y'all, please welcome Brother Ajamu.
Hey, greetings, everyone. Hope everyone is well. Hope you're at your highest possible level of mental, physical, and spiritual health. And glad to be able to have this very important discussion with you. It's not something that is talked about very often in this society and in this world, really. And that's by design. So that's why we want to take a few minutes to break down this concept of culture and what is culture and how do we use it and do we use it in our lives or is it something separate that we have to acquire? Like, what is culture? So, that's what we're going to talk about, specifically within the context of for those of us who are in what I'll call the imperialist world. And just for reference, when I say imperialism, what I mean is a system where one country goes to another country to steal its human and material resources. And so, if people don't know, the United Snakes of America is the number one imperialist country on the planet Earth. All the wealth that exists here exists because it was stolen. The land was stolen. We as African people were stolen. Everything. If you look around, whatever you're looking at, wherever you are, everything is stolen. Whatever you furniture you have, whatever was made to used to make that furniture was stolen. Everything was stolen. So this was a thief society. So when we talk about culture, and I'll explain what I mean in a minute, but it's within the context of understanding that reality. If that's what we're dealing with, is this criminal thug society that dominates the world today. And I don't know if you all have to move the slide or if I can do it. If it's you, if you could go ahead and advance it. That would be great. Thank you. So, the first question that we have to address is what is culture? What is cult? I think this is the last slide, actually. I think so. I think the next one should start with what is culture.
One moment, Brother Jamu.
Yeah.
Though that's the order that we received them in. Just one moment.
Okay. And if it won't work, I can work with whatever.
So the slides, the presentation that we have has 3 slides.
Right. Okay. So give me what you got and we'll just go with it as it is. Maybe I left something out. So I apologize for that. But essentially, the first question is, what is culture? What does it mean? And I know if we went to these bourgeois so-called educational institutions, right? If you take anthropology, what they talk about is culture is learned behavior. That's what you learn in anthropology when you go to these bourgeois schools. That we have a saying, don't let school interfere with your education. So a lot of times people think, well, if I have a university degree, so that means I know something, but it could possibly and probably mean you know less. So what they train us is to believe that culture is through the anthropological lens of bourgeois society. It's learned behavior. So it's things people learn to function. And we would argue from a African perspective, particularly a revolutionary Pan-Africanist perspective, that culture is much more than learned behavior. As Sekou Touré says, and Sekou Touré was a great African revolutionary, Pan-Africanist revolutionary from the country of Guinea, West Africa. And Sekou Touré told us that culture is the sum total of a people's experiences. So if you look at Sekou Touré's writings, particularly Africa on the Move and Strategies and Tactics of the African Revolution, for example, and these are great readings. They're not easy readings, but nothing worthwhile is easy, right? Like you got to work to anything in life worthwhile. You got to put some work into it to get the benefit of it. So it's not easy to read Sekou Touré because it's all translated from French, but it's his writings have influenced me more than anyone else. And I read a lot, you all. So I would recommend people try to read his writings if you possibly can. So what he's talking about in his writing, when he says culture is the sum total of a people's experience, he's saying that culture is the means from which we define who we are as human beings. So if you think about that, it means that how do we, when we come into the world, how do we interact with the forces that exist in the world to define our existence? How do we interact with the forces that exist in the world to define our existence? So how do we make food? How do we create living quarters? How do we communicate ideas? How do we do all these things? And how do we interact with the society we live in to do those things? So that's why culture is different for people based on where they come from, because your culture reflects how you define your existence. So for African people, particularly, since our existence in this world has been interrupted by the colonial intrusion of Europe into Africa 500 years ago, and ever since, our reality is one where our culture has come to be defined based on our resistance to the oppression that we've experienced. I'll give you an example because you might say, well, it sounds like a lot. Doesn't make any sense to me. Well, think of it like this. Several years ago, when African HBCUs, like, historic, what they call historically black colleges and universities, schools like Howard, Tuskegee, right, Grambling, Morehouse, Spelman, they have spring breaks. Like this year, I think they have one in Biloxi, Mississippi. I can't remember where it was years ago, but they have these every year, and it's where all these African college students get together. And so, in one of these sessions, I think it was in, I want to say somewhere in Florida, one of the beach towns in Florida. You had all of a sudden you had thousands of African college students descending on this town. And the police came in heavy-handed because that's what their job is to repress us. That's why they exist. So they came in heavy-handed with people, and people resisted that. The young people resisted that. And if you go back and look at the articles that were written about this situation, the way they wrote about it is they said that these black youth had on these shirts that talked about kings and queens of Africa, and they had cake cutters in their head, people that had afros, they had braided hair, they had all this stuff. So the question you ask, that you should ask when you read something like that, is what did how they wore their hair have to do with what happened on that beach during spring break? What did the fact that someone had a comb in their hair or what they had on their t-shirt have to do with what happened on that beach town during spring break? Well, the answer is that whether we recognize it or not, our enemies do, that how we define ourselves to them defines how we interact with them and how we interact with the system. And so they see the shirts with the images of Africa, they see the braided hair, the afros, the cake cutters, they see that as inconsistent with how they see society. So since they see it as inconsistent, they see it as a threat. So in other words, our very existence and how we function in the world is a threat to these societies that we live in. And you shouldn't see that as a negative thing. You should see it as a positive thing, because what it says is that African people, by virtue of how we function in these oppressive societies, we uplift our dignity. And by dignity, I mean we uplift our ability to have faith and to believe in ourselves and to respect ourselves by how we function. So everything we do, how we talk, how we sing, how we dance, how we eat, how we function in the world reflects our resistance. And so our culture becomes a culture of resistance, because everything we do in this society is about fighting against the backwardness of this society. And it's important for us to understand that, because not only is that exactly what Sekou Touré was talking about in Africa on the Move when he says culture is the sum total of a people's experience, but it also explains why everybody always wants to imitate us. Everybody always wants to imitate how we talk, how we move, how we name ourselves, everything about what we do. All the other nationalities of people want to do that. And why do they want to do that? I would argue they want to do that because they see, even though a lot of us don't necessarily see it, they see the dignity in the actions that we take. They see us making an effort to define ourselves and not just be defined by the system. It tells us who we should be. They see that. So when we do things that we don't even necessarily think about, like wear a baseball cap backwards, or even wear our pants hanging, or whatever we do, then those are forms of resistance against this society. That's why, even though I'm a 60-year-old man, I would never tell our youth, pull your pants up. I've never told our youth that. And I talk to our youth every day. And I'm not saying I want to see people's booties. That's if that's all you get from that, you're totally missing the point. The point I'm making is that I recognize that our youth wearing their pants down is not the problem. It's a reflection of the fact we are not respected as a people. So what I tell the youth is, if you're going to do that, you got to have a plan. Because I know that if our people control oil, as we should, because most of it comes from the same place we come from, Africa, if we control diamonds, as we should, same thing, if we control gold, as we should, same thing, then I know everybody in the world will be sagging their pants so they could get a good price from us on those products. So my point is that we do the things we do because we're trying to assert our dignity. And it might not come out in a way that everybody understands or accepts, but that's exactly what's happening. And so this should be seen as a positive thing. It should be seen as a reflection of us asserting our rights to be human beings. And this is why everybody thinks it's so cool and wants to emulate it. That's the reason why they want to do it. Now, the part of that we have to understand is that the capitalist system, and that's the system in power, it's the dominant economic system in the world today. It's the system that's defined as It's how all of the means of production are controlled. The water, the food, the resources we need to survive and develop are owned and controlled by private entities for private profit, so they can profit off of it. So that's the definition of capitalism that we're using right now. It's the system where the means of production are owned and controlled by private profit. Okay, so this system of capitalism never stands still. It is constantly moving. They recognize, they know that they oppress us, and so they're not surprised by the fact that we resist against that oppression. They instead try to always move out in front of us to direct how our oppression goes. So, for example, we have a cultural tool because we create institutions because we're oppressed. And so, one of the cultural tools we create to address that is African History Month, or what people commonly call Black History Month, right? So, what was the purpose of Black History Month? The original idea behind it was to create an institution that would infuse us with the narrative that we are constantly fighting for our freedom and dignity as a people. And that was the whole idea. But what has Black History Month become? It's now this race to become the first Negro to do something. I'm the first Negro to eat pork chops and ribs in the White House. That's what it's become. So it really, in most quarters, doesn't even mean anything, because it's no longer connected to the struggle of the masses of our people to be free. It's now just who can make it within the capitalist system, who can strive to aspire to be a token within the capitalist system. And a lot of us, that's how we look at it. So that's what it's become. And it's that way because who is sponsoring Black History Month? It's these corporations, McDonald's, Wells Fargo. Black History Month brought to you by McDonald's. Well, your enemy is never going to give you the tools that you need to liberate yourself. That's never going to happen. When have you ever, most of us on here have been bullied at some point in our life by someone, unfortunately. And in none of those instances has the bully ever given us the tools to get out from being bullied by them. We only get that when we learn ourselves how to stand up and have our own dignity. So that's just important to understand, that the system is always going to make an attempt to shape our culture for us. So they're going to put Malcolm X on a stamp. They're going to have a Martin Luther King holiday. They're going to do all these things because that's the compromise that they can live with. And it doesn't release any of their power over us. And it's symbolic at best. They'll let some dark person become president because whoever becomes president still is going to uphold capitalism and white supremacy and patriarchy and all those things. So it's just important for us to understand when we talk about culture that for oppressed people, our culture is our tool for liberation. It's our tool for dignity. It's our tool to move forward. And the last thing that I'll say about it is that if we understand that, we know that culture can never just be a commodity, right? It can't just be something that's bought and sold, because the capitalist system it's nonstop attempting to convince us that it's a commodity, that when we perform something, when we have a skill, we can sing, we can dance, we can rap, whatever we do, we can act, that it's just a commodity. And all you do with those skills is sell them to the highest bidder. And this has created a serious problem for us, because instead of us using our culture as a tool for dignity, and I'm not saying you can't have fun with culture, that's part of the whole purpose of it. But instead of us understanding that it never can be anything except a tool for us to assert our dignity, a lot of us will sell out our culture to the highest bidder. And that's why a lot of people who are reflections of our culture do it in a way that doesn't uphold our dignity. And we just have to understand that. Not saying that not throwing shade at anybody, just saying that we have the problem because we don't recognize that truth and justice and material reality should always be the same thing. But in this capitalist world, they are completely divorced from one another. So we just think that we can just do whatever we want to do. And as long as it benefits us, that's all that matters. And so that's why you have the reality where there are, if you look at hip hop music, for example, over the last 30 years, there are an estimated 200 hip hop rap songs that have been written that were anti-war and anti-racist. But you don't know any of those songs because they were never released. And I'm not talking about songs that were just released by people you would assume like Public Enemy or Kendrick Lamar. I'm talking about artists like the Yin Yang Twins and Lil Wayne wrote these anti-racist and anti-imperialist, anti-war songs, and their record companies told them, we're not publishing that. We want you to sing about something else. So that's what I mean when I say they're always getting out in front. And if we don't recognize that, then we'll be satisfied to just simply see culture as an individual vehicle for us to make some money. Now, I'm not just talking about this as an outsider. The last thing I'll say about this is that I'm a novelist, and novels are fiction, which is art. So I'm an artist. So I understand that. I've written 3 full-length novels, averaging about 400 and some odd pages each, and I have publishing contracts for these books that I've written that are out there, and people can buy them and read them. And I do book events. I do them virtually. I travel around. I've traveled around the whole world doing them. And I can tell you from having publishing contracts how the process works. When you write something, or you write a rap song, or whatever you're doing, when you go to these people, they're going to immediately try to get you to change what you've produced to fit into their paradigm of how they want our culture to be received and perceived throughout the world. And at that point, that's when you have a choice to make as to whether you're going to compromise what you have to make money, or whether it's more important to you to represent the character and dignity of the work that you put into it. For me, I don't feel like what I produce is my personal property, because I feel like I wouldn't be here if it were not for the African people who sacrificed before me, people I don't even know for the most part. So I feel like I have a responsibility to those people coming after me. You may not feel that way, but I do. So I would never write and produce anything and see it as just my personal property, as a commodity, as I'm saying right now. I would never see it like that. Everything I produce belongs to the masses of people, because without them, I wouldn't even be here. So I tell these publishing companies, I'm not changing anything about what I write, because my novels are about African women standing up, organizing together to fight against oppression, fight against white supremacy, all of these things. I'm not changing any of that. And so they constantly tell me, well, your book is good. We'll publish it, but we're not going to put a lot of money into promoting it. You're going to have to do that on your own. And I've had to do that with every book. And I'm satisfied with that, because if you are producing art and you think that you're going to have a best-selling product, and you're thinking you're trying to say something that reflects our culture and our dignity, there's no way those two things are going to be able to exist at the same time. If you are really sincerely trying to reflect our culture and our dignity in this backward system with what you're producing in art, you're never going to be a bestseller, because the system is never going to support what you're saying. And I grew up in California, like a lot of us. I understand and appreciate Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg at the Super Bowl, but I also recognize and understand that these corporations are never going to support something that works against their interests. So that's why they're the Super Bowl halftime show. And that's why if you're producing something with dignity for African people, you're never going to be the halftime show. Colin Kaepernick is never going to be the halftime show. Why? Because at least he's making an effort to stand up with dignity for our people. I'm not saying I agree with everything he's done, but I'm saying he's making an effort to do that. Anytime you do that, it's not going to work with the system. So just understand that when we say culture is, you look at the picture, you have Sekou Touré, who I've talked about on the left, and Comrade Fidel Castro from Cuba on the right. And what Sekou Touré said, that for oppressed people, culture is their tool to regain their humanity. So as someone else said in everyday street terms, we have to learn how to unleash the African in us that's struggling to be free. That's a street way of saying what Secretary said, that in each and every one of us, there are skills, there's quality, there's creativeness, there's all of these things that produce wonderful ideas and art. And for each of us, as Frantz Fanon said, we have a choice. We either fulfill the mission that has been placed in front of us, or we betray it. For those who betray it, that means that you say, well, I'm going to use what I have that I'm only able to use because of the sacrifices before me, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to use it to make money for myself. Or you're going to fulfill that mission and say, yeah, I want to earn a living. Nothing wrong with that. Everybody should have a comfortable living. Everybody should have a comfortable place to stay. Everybody should have a car that's reliable, and all of that's good stuff. But I know my foundation always has to be, I'm a representative of my people, and I would not be here without them. So everything I do has to uphold them in dignity. And so on the last slide, you saw examples of that with some of the people who do that, from Mariam Makeba, from Azania, South Africa, all the way to Kendrick Lamar, to Les Ballets Africains, which is the Guinea ballet group started by Sékou Touré and the Democratic Party of Guinea to accentuate our culture. And even people like Malcolm X, because culture, again, if it's a tool for liberation, it's not just performance, it's also any act that's designed to uplift the dignity and respect of our people. So activism is an act of culture. Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Amy Jock Garvey, Assata Shakur, Kwame Nkrumah, Sékou Touré, Kwame Ture, Angela Davis, those people represent our culture because they're standing up to assert our culture. You don't think it was culture when Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale and all of them grabbed guns and said, we are not going to let the police defy us anymore? That's without question an act of culture and dignity. So all of this is culture, and that's what we have to understand. And when we perform art, we're just simply exhibiting an aspect of that culture. And so I'm going to stop there. That's a lot in 30 minutes, but I'm going to stop there. And if there's any comments or questions, I think there's time for that. We can have that discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brother John. That was very thorough. I appreciate you so very much. I did have some questions, just like NWA said, period. um, I did have some questions that I prepared for you, but I also wanted to see if there's anyone in the comments before we went to the. Wow. No, that was really powerful. I really appreciate what you were speaking in regards to respectability in our youth, because young people, especially young Black people, have become all over the world. African babies all over the world have become like the scapegoats for a lot of cultural phenomenons. And when we begin to make things trendy, we begin to make things just a part of our everyday pop culture, then we begin to get blamed for it. But Dr. Amos Wilson said, when you really want to acknowledge like what the problem is in America, you have to acknowledge who's profiting from the problem in
That's
America.
right.
So before you really begin to like point the finger at our young people, you have to remember that they're not making any money based on their situation or their conditioning, but they are yet and still conditioned. So I don't think anyone has any questions. I would just leave with our first question, Brother Ahjamu. And you did mention some of those books, but I would like to say if there's any books that specifically speaks to violence and how violence aligns with self-hatred, that we see a lot in the media, that is perpetuated and so much started somewhat by like some of our oppressors' intended visions of our fate.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of truly good books on that. I mean, they're not new books, but they have totally addressed what you just named. The first one is called Black Skin, White Masks by Frantz Fanon. And
Okay.
Frantz Fanon was an African, revolutionary African psychiatrist. He was born in the Caribbean and he moved to Africa, to Algeria. And he wrote that book in the late 50s, early 60s. But people should read it because what he talked about the violence of colonialism and the people who, I mean, think about it. Like violence is like, we think of violence as just like okay, I'm going to take my fist and hit someone, or I'm going to take a gun and shoot them. And what obviously that's violence, but there are so many other forms of violence. And so he talks about in the book the process of colonialism. Like, think about it for a second. We're here in 2022, and what about our existence do we control? And I know when I say that, people's knee jerk reaction is, well, I control everything in my life. But do you? Think about it for a second. The names that we carry, not me, because I gave mine back to him years ago, but the names that most of us carry are the names of our slave masters. There's no Johnsons, Smiths, Jones. Those are not names that exist in Africa. So they renamed us like you get a dog and you name your dog. I'm not trying to upset anybody, but it's irrefutable. That's what it is. The language we're speaking right now is a colonial language. We were not at the British Round Table speaking English. This is a language that we're speaking that was imposed upon us through violence. So everything about our existence has been the violence of our colonial oppressors to shape us in the manner that they want us to function in. So Fanon in that book talks about how we can learn how to reclaim our health and our dignity, and understanding that sometimes there are appropriate places where violence should be used, specifically to overthrow the oppressors who are oppressing us. So, but it's a whole process. So that book does a great job of laying that out. Like, even the violence we commit against each other, as you brought up, that's a reflection of the colonial experience. You can't have a people 350 years who you're breeding like pit bulls, and then, oh, why do they act like that? Well, of course, that's not even the question why we act like that. The question is, why is it you're supposed to be so civilized and so ahead of us, and everything we learned about violence we got from you? We don't own any gun factories. We don't produce any. We don't even know how to make a firecracker. So you can't blame gun violence on us. Like, that's Smith and Wesson and Glock and Sig Sauer and Winchester and all Remington and all these European gun manufacturers that create the weapons of mass destruction on the planet. So that's what he's talking about. And then another really good book is Steve Biko's I Write What I Like. It's kind of very similar to the Fanon book, but it's really talking about the psychology that we have as African people and how we have been groomed to hate ourselves and to hate any effort we make to free ourselves from this existence. They're basically groomed to become European-like people. That's what the whole design is, and to our values to be based on European capitalist values and not values that reflect our freedom and our liberation. Just a quick example. So most of us, the way we think, we're excited to get a car, like we get a Tesla. We don't give 5 seconds of thought to the fact that the ability to make the battery, to make the electric car, the lithium, there's only one place in the world where that's plentifully supplied. That's Africa. The aerodynamic design of the Tesla comes from zinc that bends steel. Both of those metals you can only get in plentiful supply from Africa. The rubber to make the tires, plentiful supply from Liberia. The gas in the engine, plentiful supply from Nigeria. So all of those things come from the same place we come from, Africa. So we should be, if we're thinking healthy, the question is, why don't we control the manufacture and production of Tesla cars? Not how can we make $1,000 a month payment that we probably can't even really afford just to have one. That's a slave mentality, if that's all we're thinking about. So that's what these books are talking about, you all. How do we elevate our thinking so that we can get free?
Wow, thank you so much for that. Was amazing. So we had two book recommendations. That was Friends for Non Black Skin, White Mask, and Steve Biko. I Write What I Like. Our next question is based on this conversation of respectability and censorship, as we were in regard to African or Black artists. Is the conversation of respectability and censorship removed from the greater cultural responsibility when Black artists choose to participate and exercise free speech? Is there a balance in what we must put out for our people that promotes our unity and having raw feelings that reflect our real conditioning?
Yeah, I mean, I think the primary problem with this reality that your question addresses is that, number one, I don't think most of us, we don't understand who we are. Like, again, we have been programmed. So a lot of us believe we're Americans. I know this might hurt some feelings, but we got to learn, like, if you disagree with something, you got to develop a analytical position to address it. You can't just, if you just disagree because it hurts your feelings, that's your problem. You got to get over that. That's our problem now. Truth and justice is totally divorced from material reality. And whatever everybody feels, then that's the truth to them. Like, that's insanity. Like, your truth is your truth. We've all heard that because that's commonly said. Like, 1 + 1 = 50. Well, that's your truth. No, you're wrong. You need to do some work and figure out how to come to the correct answer. So I think that what needs to happen is that we have to begin to discuss this reality that this system has trained us to believe that we're Americans. And so if we believe that, whether we say African Americans, Black Americans, that we're Americans. And so if we believe that, then we believe that whatever this system does is in our interest. So we'll promote the values of the very system that's designed to subjugate us. And we do that every day. So I think that's the critical question, because if we understood that, then the question that you're raising, it wouldn't be as much of an issue as it is, because our artists would be able to say, okay, here's who I am as a person. This is what I'm trying to do. I got to make money. I got to earn a living, because we all are faced with that. We all got to learn to earn a living. We all have to do that. But you can do that and retain your dignity. You cannot, there's no argument. You won't be able to convince me that the only way you can exert your dignity, you have to compromise your dignity to earn a living, rather. That's nonsense. That's talking points designed to justify being a coward. You can assert your dignity and still earn a living. I've done it, and I'm nothing special. I earn a very good living, and I have not compromised my dignity. So I don't want to hear that. Like, when people compromise their dignity, that's a choice we're making. And I'm not blaming the people, because I know that, again, this system has convinced us that if we do things that are in the interest of the system, and in capitalism, everything's about making money, get money, get money, get money, get money. So we believe that if we're doing that, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, we don't understand how this system maintains itself. Like the example I gave about the Tesla, we don't understand that if every African in the US became a millionaire, the only way that could happen is on the backs of our people in Africa and the Caribbean and other places around it. We don't understand that. We don't understand why I would say something like that. We don't know what that means. And that's not our fault. Not blaming anybody for not understanding that. It's by design, you all. So all I'm saying today is not that you have to understand all that. Of course not. But I'm saying that we have to start thinking about how this system and how it trains us is not in our interest. It never has been. And every institution in this society is not designed to help us. All of the education system in society, it's not designed to your enemy's not going to educate you on how to be free. The police were created simply to serve as terrorists, to drive our people who were escaping the slave plantations back to the South to the slave. That's how police started in this country. They were never here to protect and serve. But you get my point. If we're confused about who we are, you hear our people say it all the time. Well, the police are supposed to be here to protect. No, they're not. You don't know our history if you're saying that. They were never here to protect and serve us. They were always here to terrorize us. They're simply, the ones here today are just channeling the ghosts of their ancestors. They were police. That's all they're doing when they brutalize us and shoot us down. But if we don't know who we are, we don't understand that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for painting that picture so clearly. It's a basis of identity. We talk about who we are as artists, talk about who we are as vessels and mediums for our creative freedoms. We are African first. And that's ultimately what we preach here at West to West. So thank you for that. What skills can we gather to help become more critical of our media consumption?
So I think that it's it's very important that we all recognize that this system has not prepared us to address these questions clearly. So whether it's West to West or any organization our people are part of, we have to involve a regular study process that has independent analysis, like the examples of the books I gave you. Those authors are not trying to write something that's going to appease the system. They're trying to provide us information to help us grow stronger to confront the system. So we have to be engaged in some kind of process that's designed to help us learn how to do that. And it doesn't matter who it is, like in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we have work study. I've been in this process almost 40 years. And I got a master's degree from the European University, and what I learned from that doesn't even pale in comparison to what I got in this work study process. So we all have to be involved in some kind of process like that, because what it'll help us do is begin to think independently. And I know we think independently right now, but if all we're doing is watching their news, going to their schools, and we're not reading anything on our own about our, then I don't know how we can seriously argue that we think independently. I can tell you there's millions of people who dress like we dress, eat the food we eat, like the things we like, and you haven't met them, they haven't met you. So clearly, there's a propaganda thing going on that's designed to condition us. So we have to, if we engage in a process like that, then we learn some critical skills. Skills, some of these skills you get just by practice on your own. But if we engage in the type of collective process I'm talking about, we can increase the chances that more of us on a systemic level will learn these skills. I'll give you a quick example of the skills. So years ago, here in Sacramento, California, where I live, 1991 to be exact, our organization hosted African Liberation Day here in Sacramento for many years. And those of you that know Sacramento, in what they call the Big Park, McClatchy Park, I do self-defense trainings out there every Saturday now. But years ago, in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, we did African Liberation Day out there every May. And we do that all over the world. Well, in 1991, before there was even a stage in the park, if you know the history of that park, we had Tupac Shakur rapping there. And if you don't believe me, there's a video. It's on YouTube. It's called Tupac Shakur Raps at African Liberation Day in Sacramento, 1991. And when you look at the video, you can see me standing behind the stage because I introduced him, even though, to be honest, I didn't even know who he was, because it was right before the Juice movie came out. And that's when his popularity really began to, grow. But the point I'm telling you is we had like 4,000 or 5,000 people out there. And we know from the work we were doing that we would get gang affiliated people in the park from Meadowview, which is, another area of Sacramento, from Oak Park, which is where we were, from Del Paso Heights, was another area. Conflicting gang affiliated folks would come in the park, and we never had a problem because we would meet with them, talk to them. They understood what was going on. We never had a problem. The police were dumbfounded. So we know from our work that the police infiltrated and sabotaged, because that's what police do, create friction so they could justify coming in and shutting us down and arresting everybody and shooting people and doing what police are here to do. So in the 1991 African Liberation Day that Tupac was at, again, I'm honest, I don't know who he is, but he's standing there and he's about to go up. And myself and a couple of other people, we were the program coordinators. So there was some friction in the park, and we knew it was police instigated, but we didn't want anybody to get hurt. Thousands of people out there. They're our responsibility. So I was saying we need to shut the program down after this person who was on stage. I can't even remember who it was. After they get done, we need to shut the program down. And he was standing next to me, and he taps me on the shoulder. And he says, "Big bro, if you let me get up there, I can chill things out." And I'm looking at this dude like, who is this dude? And one of the other brothers in the party was like, "You should let him do it," because he knew who he was from the Digital Underground. He's like, "You should let him do it." And so I'm like, okay, something about it, it's felt right to me. So if you watch the video on YouTube, Tupac Shakur raps at African degree. He did exactly what he said. He totally chilled the crowd out, and he was rapping about the things that we're talking about, our dignity as a people. And so my point is that that dude developed the skills to be able to facilitate that kind of influence on a crowd of thousands of people. And we all need to learn how to use our skills to do that. Now, of course, he had contradictions. We all do. You know, we understand that. We're not in control. That's a given. We all have contradictions. But the point is, if we look at everybody, the reason why we know who Tupac Shakur is isn't because of whatever negative it's because of his contribution that has influenced our lives. So I prefer to look at that element of his life and say that these skills that he exhibited to me in person that day, 30 years ago, over 30 years ago, are a reflection of what we all can have as a people. And if we have a process like I described, where we're learning independent of this backward system, we can develop, all of us, skills so that we can, if we're rapping, we can do it the way he did it. If we're singing, we can do it that way. If we're doing open mouth, we can do it that way. If we're writing, if we're doing, if we're drawing, if we're painting, whatever art we're doing, it can be done in a way that allows us to do all of the things we need to do. I sell books. I earn money from the books. You can earn money from your art. But I do that because of the dignity in the message that I'm putting out there. So you don't have to compromise. Anybody telling you that, that's an agent of the system. You don't have to compromise to represent our people with dignity and still do what you need to do to earn a living. Because we get it. Like, this capitalist system not going to hire you. You got to be creative and find ways to earn money. Nothing wrong with that. And we don't have to compromise our dignity to do that, though.
Thank you so much for that, Brother Jamu. I appreciate you. That actually went into my last question, but you kind of already answered this. Like, how can music and our artistic tools be used as tools in the movement or for reclamation? But you answered that by saying just keeping it close to home, keeping our dignity, making sure our messages respond and reflect to our conditioning. Like, we need to make sure that we are not limited in our artistic creation. It has been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful talk. You all, this has been Brother Ahjamu Umi, organizer with the African People's Revolutionary Party, on culture and how do we reclaim it for ourselves as African people. Hope you all have a wonderful evening. If you all need any information, Brother Jamu, how can folks keep up with you and follow up with you?
Yeah, you can reach me at www.abetterworld.me. www.abetterworld.me. Ahjamu Umi's Truth Challenge. And also through Hood Communist Collective. Hopefully you know about that, hoodcommunist.org. It's a blog I write for and I'm an editor for. So either one is good.
All right, y'all. We have those two, abetterworld.me and hoodcommunist.org. Again, Brother Jamu, we appreciate you so, so very much for laying down these gems tonight. Really getting it cool. Hope you have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
You all do the same. Forward ever.
For whatever.